On this edition of Fed Gov Today, not everybody's sold on the next generation of FedRAMP.
There's still a little bit of nervousness as to whether or not agencies have kind of like fully embraced the 20x new environment.
Former FAST Commissioner Julie Dunne on Fed Gov Today in just a moment. Uniting program strategy, advanced technology, process, and execution for a more efficient government. That's Maximus. Every program, every service, every time. That's innovation forward. Learn more at maximus.com/federal. New rules will make FedRAMP certification more accessible. The General Services Administration says the goal of the new generation of FedRAMP 20x is to, quote, make FedRAMP clearer, faster, more transparent, and more reusable. Julie Dunne's principal at Monument Advocacy. She's former commissioner of the Federal Acquisition Service at GSA. Julie, it's great to talk to you again. And it was terrific to see you at the summit on FedRAMP last week. All the big honchos in FedRAMP at GSA were there. We talked a little bit on the sidelines of the event about some of your takeaways. What were some of those now that you've had a couple of days to chew on what you heard there and what people are talking about in this community more broadly, Julie? Welcome.
Thank you. It was kind of exciting, and it made me kind of do a little bit of the look back machine, having dealt with FedRAMP for a very long time. I remember the FedRAMP director briefing me when I was on House Oversight and asking, hey, do you need more than an OMB memo to make this thing stick? And, we kind of talked about it. And years later, Mr. Connolly got this enacted into law. I think I was pretty excited to see Congressman Walkinshaw kind of take the leadership mantle when it comes to FedRAMP reauthorization, because, the original law expires in December 2027. I think the FedRAMP PMO has done an extraordinary job in trying to make change. It's very hard to affect change in the federal government, and there are a lot of moving parts in a government-wide program like this. There's a lot of goodness in 20X, from automation to some of the real-time engagement. I talked to some people on the sidelines, and I think there's still a little bit of nervousness as to whether or not agencies have kind of like fully embraced the 20x new environment. And I think there's also a little bit of a disconnect in, the civilian, ecosystem versus the Department of War. What does that mean for a provider that's coming into this space? Do they have to think about, who's accepting what? And, I know we want to, part of the mandate of the 20x program is to eventually phase out what they call, Rev 5, which a lot of people have invested in. I know it's a new environment. So, we'll see how things go. Adoption, education, that's always a challenge. And I think that's kind of where we are right now.
What's your sense of the changes to 20X and the way that they kind of, I think they're a lot more revolutionary than people are talking about yet. And we did a conversation with Pete Waterman, the program manager, and Ryan Hazing, the chief of staff for FedRAMP. And that'll be on Fed Gov Today TV in a couple of weeks. But my takeaway from that conversation is they're really rethinking the whole point of the program and the reason that it exists. And that's probably appropriate because FedRAMP's been around now, if I recall right, for 12 or 15 years. The cloud landscapes changed dramatically in that period of time. The cybersecurity landscapes changed dramatically in that period of time. The way agencies use the cloud has changed and so on. Is it your sense that the vendor community is on board with the reasons that FedRAMP has to change versus the ways that they're changing it?
As you point out, the environment has changed significantly since I think it was 2011 when the program was first established. We're talking about all types of cloud service solutions. The cybersecurity risk is real and profound, particularly for the federal government space. I think we still have the underlying themes for the FedRAMP program that apply, which I think Congressman Walkinshaw walked through in the beginning. He said, this is about avoiding duplication. It's about reuse. It's about making sure that we have secure solutions. How you get there, as you point out, is part of, what we're all talking about, and implementation of that. The FedRAMP team has a large mandate. It's kind of a small shop, I believe. So, they've got a challenge in terms of talking to their agency communities and getting folks to adopt the new world. Doing things like automation and thinking more about what the risk is on a continuous basis. Those are fundamental baseline things that we all need to be thinking about. That's what security is today. It can no longer be a point in time, but you also you have to bring people along, and you don't want to put the cloud service community in a spot where they're preparing, three different packages depending on who their federal agency is.
You mentioned the nervousness that you detected, not just in the conversations I imagine that you had at the summit on FedRAMP, but you talk to folks about these issues all the time. What's driving that nervousness in your view, and who could do what to assuage that to some degree?
Well, making change in the federal government, I think it's change, right? And there's so much that's coming at, federal executives, particularly in the IT space. And I think some of those organizations within the particularly civilian space, they probably have some resource constraints. So maybe they don't have as many people to look at some of the FedRAMP baseline packages, and they're used to doing it a certain way. So just kind of understanding what the changes are, what they do need to check, because, every federal agency, they're still responsible for signing off on an ATO, and they're used to a certain way of doing things. I'm sure there are some that are more on the line of early adopters. There's some probably a little more cautious, and it also kind of depends on the agency's risk profile, right? So you're dealing with all different kinds of information there. So, nervous maybe just because of the change and understanding, what the expectation is. Like I said, they're used to a certain product. I think one of the things, maybe, I'm sure there are probably internal conversations within OMB, like, hey, maybe there's some sort of government-wide OMB guidance that needs to come out that is tagged to budget guidance. Right? Like every federal agency, they're in this process now. Like, how are you going to implement X, and what is your funding source for that? I think we also have an opportunity as we start the conversation about FedRAMP reauthorization, right? I think I was heartened. Congressman Walkinshaw said they've already started having conversations about this, which is good to hear, considering how long it takes to get something like this over the finish line. So it's going to take a bit of time. So I'm glad we're all having these conversations.
I imagine some of the nervousness, too, just comes from the overall uncertainty in the cloud and security world all across the government. You mentioned a few moments ago, there's a lot of conversation about what changes at FedRAMP could potentially mean in the Pentagon, too. There was a period of time, I want to say, well, it might have been when you were in, there were conversations around, would the department start to use FedRAMP, at least FedRAMP guidelines, in procurements in the Pentagon? And then I don't know what happened to that. Maybe it became sufficiently a part of the way the Pentagon does business, and there's no need to talk about it anymore. There's no need to highlight it anymore. But that conversation seems to have died down. DIS is about to relet the successor to the JWCC. There's all kinds of cloud stuff going on over there. What will be the security requirements for that? Could that be where some of the nervousness is coming from? Just that there's a whole lot of things up in the air in this area right now?
Yes, there are definitely a lot of things up in the air, and you're exactly right. I think a couple of years ago, the Pentagon CIO said, I think there was a memo that said FedRAMP moderate was a baseline where they could kind of start off the conversation as they kind of gear up for some of the Pentagon's security framework. So so it was a known baseline. And I've also heard that, FedRAMP as a security process is something that even overseas people understand and know what it's about. So it's something, and then there's also something I'm tracking quite closely is the revolutionary FAR overhaul. And there've been a couple of proposed rules that were published earlier this month. And there was one of the rules covered controlled unclassified information, and there were references to FedRAMP in there. right? Including FedRAMP Rev 5, which is, a NIST publication, the latest one. And then you hear things during the 20X reform conversation that Rev 5 is going away. So, we'll see what agency adoption is. I know a lot of people are investing in the 20X program. You want to make sure that investment is worthwhile, and you actually can go to market. But when you've got a disconnect between what the civilian and the Pentagon space is saying, and then, maybe some parts of the organization are not going to let go of Rev 5 so easily. So there's a lot of work to do. And I know the FedRAMP team, the PMO is it's small but mighty shop, working hard to try and make it happen. They probably need a little help from our OMB colleagues, and maybe some coordination with the FAR Council as well.
Dave McClure was on my program in 2011 when FedRAMP first rolled out, and he said an important element of FedRAMP was reusability. It sounds like we have gotten to a point where reusability is important, replicability is not necessarily as important, where agency X did this, so agency Y will buy exactly the same thing because it's satisfied that that meets the criteria. There's still going to be a fair amount of individual agency tweaking, it sounds like, and I wonder how much that gets away from the idea of replicability, or if that's not that important.
Well, the agencies are going to have different risk profiles, right? And they have to make that determination. They also, under the FedRAMP Authorization Act, there's a focus on reciprocity. So thinking about, there's a baseline of security. So if the FedRAMP program has signed off on this baseline, you shouldn't have to do over everything, right? There should be a baseline that you understand and accept across the government within the realm of your risk profile for your particular agency. So there's just, I think reusability is an incredibly important concept. And that is the way that, you reduce costs for these cloud service providers who are trying to enter the market. So there's a lot of moving parts, and I'm looking forward to the FedRAMP reauthorization conversation.
I'll look forward to talking to you about that when it rolls around and becomes a lot more robust. Thanks for joining me today, Julie.
Absolutely. Thank you.
You can read more about FedRAMP 20X on today's show page at fedgovtoday.com. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission's licensing review process is almost 2/3 shorter now than it was before. The NRC cut the review process from 4 years to 18 months by using a combination of AI tools and other cutting-edge technology. Caroline Carasoni, the Chief AI Officer at the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, tells you how on the new Fed Gov Today TV. You can watch it whenever you want on the Fed Gov Today YouTube channel or on fedgovtoday.com. And the latest edition of Fed Gov Today TV is coming this Sunday morning at 10 on ABC7 in Washington. The next Fed Gov Today podcast comes Thursday. I'm Francis Rose. I'll talk to you then. Thanks for listening.